everyone, and welcome back to the Information Bottleneck. And hi, Alan.
Hi, Ravid, and hi, Alex. It's nice to meet you.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
So today we are going to talk about AI and the labor market, or like if AI will take our jobs. And for that, we brought the expert for AI and the labor market, Alex Imas. He's a professor at Chicago that exactly looking on these topics. So Alex, maybe let's start like with the question. Does AI is something that will take our jobs?
So first, I wouldn't call myself the expert on it. I'll take a
One
little
of the
bit of
experts.
expertise, but I'm not going to take all of it. I think the answer is like it will take some jobs, probably. Like I would, first of all, I'd like to preface the entire conversation with when you're talking about something, such a fast-moving technology where even the researchers who are literally building it don't fully understand why it has the capabilities that it does. I think it's important to have wide confidence bands about everything that you're saying, and I have those wide confidence bands in the sense that I will use some historical analogies, I will use some economic theory, I will use some current data to inform my opinions and the sort of things that I'm going to say. But at the same time, I'm very, very comfortable with saying that while these beliefs I believe are founded on something, I could be wrong. So my answer to the jobs question is I think it's likely that they will take some jobs. So, historical technological shocks, other than some salient examples like general computing was very complementary to jobs, so to human labor. So you saw jobs changing, people moving, but there was no like time of like high unemployment, right? And that was actually very unique for general technology. Usually the way that general technologies work is that they do displace people. And the thing that you see is that people are displaced. So some jobs disappear or shrink by a lot. But kind of the stylized fact is that more jobs are created than destroyed. So you have this process of creative destruction where certain jobs are destroyed or eliminated or kind of fold into other things, but you have new jobs which people probably didn't anticipate. So for example, if you look back, around 50% of jobs that exist now that employ lots and lots and lots of people just didn't exist 60 years ago. Like you couldn't have even fathom the fact that you have jobs like, some of the jobs you have with accounting, like even like something like a software engineer, like where was that in 1940? Where was that in 1950? And yet that employs a huge amount of the economy. So that's kind of like what this process looks like is that, yes, if AI, and I think I'm on the side that AI will be disruptive, AI will be a significant general technology. If you are in that camp, then I think there will be there will be people moving around. There will be people who are displaced. Now, the speed of that and where they're displaced to, and what are the new jobs, those are largely the question marks.
Few questions. First, like, why you saying that like at the end, it sounds like a question that like involves both AI and economics, right? Like you need to know both, like where AI is going, right? Like what are the capabilities of AI and where it will be good in some subdomains, and also like economic, like how these like capabilities will affect the economy, right? So do you think like you should be an expert in both of them? You feel like we should ask like different people who are the right people to ask these questions?
So I think economists are the right people to talk to, conditional on capabilities, right? So like the way that kind of like economists think about these questions is you have a model of jobs, and like the thing to note here is that a job is not a task. It's actually a bunch of different tasks. Some jobs have lots of different tasks. Other jobs have fewer tasks. But thinking about like, look, AI can do this. And while that task, that thing that AI is doing may be characteristic of a job, like when you think about, writing code in a certain way, you think, oh, software engineers write code in this way. Now AI can do it. Now there's no more software engineers. Well, that loop isn't necessarily connected because software engineers are actually doing lots of other stuff that's part of their job. So that's the first thing to say is like, look, we need to map the kind of task structure of the job. And then now you tell me like, this is what AI can do. And then based on that, I think an economist's comparative advantage would be to say, here is under this set of assumptions, which good economics is very transparent about that. Here's what's going to happen in the future. Here's how we can interpret it now in terms of like the welfare, the like kind of public policy implications of this. But asking an economist to say like, what is AI going to do capability wise in like 6 months? I don't think I have any comparative advantage in making those sorts of statements. And then you could flip that around to say like you go to a technologist and you say, hey, what do you think AI is going to do in the next 6 months? They probably are very good about that. And giving you like the technological frontier or predictions about the technological frontier, but they might be less good in thinking like, what does that imply for the economy? Because of what I said, but all of these other sorts of things that are involved in like a complex system, like like an economy, like for example, like what sort of goods, what sort of products will be demanded by the market, what sort of how services are going to change. All of these things like are endogenous to preferences and to the population. They're not just a function of the technological capabilities.
So, what I'm kind of wondering, about your take on is, what do you anticipate, like maybe, and I realize that you might, say you have a hard time predicting what AI capabilities might look like in the future, but I claim that the economy is still way behind the AI we have today. I think that significant amounts of white collar work today are best done by AI systems, Claude Code, maybe a deep research query in Gemini or something like that. And so, I'm already seeing like this crisis of confidence, and even being externalized politically in the form of a rapidly rising like modern Luddite anti-AI movement forming pretty much everywhere outside of San Francisco. Probably the most relevant article is titled "Everyone in Seattle Hates AI," which went viral on Hacker News. And so I guess what I'm curious about is like, do you see maybe today or even in 5 years or something, these kind of scenarios kind of predicted by, I would say, most cyberpunk media, maybe Cyberpunk 2077, the most relevant one I played recently of, the economy gets extremely K-shaped. Or I'm in Brazil and I've heard the term Brazilification to refer to that. And I'm just wondering, like, do you think that that's already kind of like locked in or inevitable? And do you even have predictions on what like an unemployment rate might look like 5 years from now in like the United States?
Think so. There were a bunch of things in there. Like one about the capabilities of AI systems relative to how they're actually used. I completely agree with you. The AI systems right now are much more capable than what we're seeing in the economy. So, like Ethan Malik has talked about this a lot. Like the idea that stop progress today, and you're going to have huge economic disruption. And I agree with that. Like, if you look at like adoption of even things like, agentic AI systems like Claude Code or Codex or something like that, they're tiny, but that is where most of the capabilities of these systems are. It's not in the chatbots. It's when you're having like, Codex running with like, 15 different subagents. That's when you're getting the capabilities of AI really pushing through to actual economically meaningful tasks. So I think a big wake up call for many people was like in around December, November time, right? When all of a sudden Claude Code went viral, right? So a lot of us who were like kind of paying attention before that, like knew that this was happening, that this was going to happen. But for many people, that was their first exposure to agentic AI. And the reason that agentic AI was such a big deal is because all of a sudden you went from like a lot of people talking that these systems can do this, from you being able to download this thing and say like, hey, can you make me a PowerPoint deck? And then all of a sudden there's a PowerPoint deck, right? And that took the harness in order to make reality. And given that, the fact that so few people, including in industry, are actually using the harness means that we're not even nearly done understanding the economic consequences of the current state of the technology. Now, the fact that the technology is improving a lot while this is happening means that, exactly as you said, like we're going to see some serious disruption. Now, your second point about cyberpunk, the other part is that the adoption margin looks pretty bad. in the sense that if I'm an economist and I care about like, welfare and equity, like inequality in the economy, I care about things like if the technology exists to make my job better and make me more productive, that means I'm using that technology. What you see in the data, and this is in the Anthropic report, this is in many, many surveys, is that the adoption margin looks like the people who are already productive and already doing pretty well, those are the people who are most likely to adopt the technology. And that's how you get the K shape, right? You get the people who are richer, who are more educated, who are living in higher income countries. Like any way you want to slice the data, whatever you want to load on advantage, that's going to predict AI adoption. And that to me is kind of like, that is one of the, if I have like a top 5 list of things that I'm worried about for the economics of AI, the adoption margin is probably towards the top. The fact that the technology is becoming extremely capable and the people who are using it and using it productively and know how to use it productively are people who would have been advantaged anyway, and they're just getting superpowers. While people who were disadvantaged in the sense of like, education and all of this type of thing, um, uh, are not using the technology and are essentially going to be falling behind even. And this narrative that you're talking about exacerbates it because those people are listening to, the news sources that are calling these things stochastic parrots or hallucination machines, or like they can't really do any work. So they don't adopt it. They think that this technology is not actually very good and they're just going to fall behind even further. So I'm extremely worried about these sorts of things. Now, your third question is the unemployment rate in not, cyberpunk future. That's I don't know what the rate is going to be. I've written about this before. Like depending on how you want to go, how far you want to go into the future. My claim is that I think the unemployment, I think a labor share is going to decrease. I don't think labor share is going to increase like we've had with previous technologies. I think AI on that dimension is fundamentally different. But I do push back about narratives that labor share is going to go to zero. I think there will be a sustained, substantial labor share. Um, and what unemployment looks like in that world is a completely separate question because this implies people who want to be employed or not employed. That's the unemployment rate. These are people actively working, looking for work. Even in the system where labor share is smaller, you could have a very small unemployment rate when you have policies like universal basic capital or something like that, where people are, kind of doing their own thing and they're not looking for work, but that's not a problem necessarily.
Then let me ask quick follow-up on that, which is what did you think of Andrew Yang circa like even 2020 and what he's been talking about today? I'll just put it, I was a huge fan of #math and a total Yang ganger at the time, and I feel like he's been really, really vindicated, and I just want to know your thoughts on him.
You mean the end of office work stuff?
Well, pretty much everything. So he was warning about automation and the specter of it back in 2020, right? And yeah, he wrote that little op-ed, I think, on LinkedIn as well. Thank you, by the way, for bringing up Ethan Mollick. I really like him and his takes.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
So two things. Like, let me read you a quote. If machinery could do all the work that labor does now, there will be no demand for labor, and labor will be disadvantaged and disappear. Who do you think said that?
Oh, God, I don't know. Somebody like Adam, like some old economist, maybe.
Well, some old economist. It was Ricardo in
yeah,
a paper called "On Machinery" from 1821. The idea that technology is going to automate all labor is not a fresh idea. It's a very old idea. And so the automation narrative happens whenever you see a new technology. You saw it with computing, right? But computing did the exact opposite. Like it wasn't even like, it was literally the exact opposite. So like with coal and stuff like that and the Industrial Revolution and all of that type of stuff, you saw some automation in the sense that like people were like completely displaced and were unemployed. And you had the Luddite movement and all of this sort of thing. You had new jobs being created, but you had a lot of people displaced. People were writing jobs about computers that basically said computers are going to automate all work, not artificial intelligence, computers. And therefore, we're going to see zero people employed. So every time you get a new technology, you get a very popular New York Times bestseller book that says this will replace all labor. the capitalist overlords will rule everything. We're going to get into, the plot from, We or something like that, which is a very good dystopian novel that many people don't know about because it was written in the Soviet Union and banned for many years. But it's like the good version of 1984. So I think like vindication is a strong word here. I think Andrew was right in the sense that the capabilities of the technology, as far as like being able to emulate specific tasks, he's been vindicated on that, clearly, and he was very early on that. So absolutely all credit to him. But if you look at the software engineering market right now, or if you look at office work, or basically anything, we haven't seen it yet. Now, am I saying like we won't see it? I actually think we will see it. We will see disruption. I want to emphasize this, that I think we will see disruption. But to say like, make statements like, okay, this job won't exist in 6 months, which many people were making 2 years ago. If anything, you see software engineering picking up. If you look at the numbers, there's certainly no like big drop in software engineering jobs. If anything, if you want to have like, if you look at certain type of numbers, like, Indeed data or something like that, you actually see it increasing. So as I said before, like I want to have wide confidence bands about this type of stuff. And I think when I want to say somebody's vindicated, I do want to say that Andrew was vindicated on the technological front. And all kudos to him. But as far as the economics of it, I wouldn't say that yet.
So two things, like, so first, like you didn't say it, but like people like Dario, right, the CEO of Anthropic, that like claim all the time that like in several months we will see like all white collar jobs will disappear basically, and also others. So like first, like why you think we don't see it yet? Okay, this is the first question, and the second question is like what we will see, like what types of job will disappear and what factors will actually like affect this.
So this is a really, really big question again. So I think like it's worth getting into the model of jobs, right? So there's the supply and demand aspect of labor markets, and both are actually relevant to your question. So Louis Garicano wrote a really nice response to one of my posts called A Response to Dario and Imas. I'm not sure if that, I don't think that's what it's called, but I think that is the subtitle of the, and he made a very good point about the supply of jobs. And the point there is that, as I mentioned earlier, jobs are not one task. There are many different tasks. And the tasks are not, there's a model of the world where the tasks are completely separable, in the sense that, like, look, I can write the code, but if something can write the code, that thing could just write the code and do that part of the job, and I could be focusing on something else, and that's fine. But other types of jobs are, including software engineers, including writing code, has elements where the tasks actually interact in non-obvious ways, and they actually need to be held together in order for the job to be completed. So take cooking. Cooking is the easiest example, right? Like if I'm cooking a nice meal and I'm getting all of the ingredients right, beautiful presentation, all of the tasks are wonderful, the meal looks good, and all of a sudden, I oversalt it. That's a shit meal. Like nobody wants to eat that. That just one little thing, one part of my task, I screwed it up and the whole job is done. Turns out that that's called complementarity between tasks, where one task affects how the other tasks affect the output. That's not obvious, right? The obvious thing is like to think about it as like, if you do everything, you just kind of add up the quality, and when you add up the quality, that's the quality of the output. Multiplicative interactive element. It's interesting because you all as AI and researchers should be very familiar with this. This is how LLMs work, huge interactive networks. But for some reason, it's less obvious to think about the economy like that. But that is how the economy works, even on the job level. So what Louis said is that jobs are like that, and therefore, automating certain parts of a software engineer's job or a white collar worker's job is actually not going to lead them to be fired. It may then actually increase employment. It may increase wages. And the reason that this happens is, like, let's say you're a software engineer, you're making a product. all of a sudden you become more productive because AI is letting you ship more product. You guys said earlier before we got on that people in AI, people in computer science, they're working more hours than ever despite becoming more productive. Why is that happening? Well, the fact is, if you could ship more product and consumers on the other side want to buy that product because the price of the product, the quality of the product has gone down. The quality has gone up, the price has gone down. If demand is actually absorbing the increasing output, that the statistic there is the elasticity of consumer demand. That's how much consumer demand responds to decreases in prices and decreases in prices mostly. If it's very elastic, what you see is more hiring. I'm getting more productive, but actually I'm being more productive. I can ship more units, but consumers are buying so many of these units. I want to hire more of this person because I need to keep up with the increased demand. And this elasticity statistic turns out to be high for very, very, very many products, right? So that's the supply dimension of these of the labor market. The idea that, look, by making people more productive, by automating these things, will decrease employment. That's not obvious at all. If the elasticity of consumer demand is high, you might actually get higher wages and more people being hired for that role. And in fact, that's what we see in many cases, including this is basically what we're seeing right now in the software industry. Now, how long that's going to be maintained, whether you can automate all of the tasks, those are question marks. But I agree with Luis that it's not obvious that everything is going to be automated. And the length of time for it to be automated is going to be much slower than you actually think because of all these bottlenecks and all of like regulation, all sorts of things. And until it's automated, the elasticity until the whole job is automated, the elasticity of consumer demand could actually lead to more high.
Also can be the other way around, right? It like if now like it's cheaper to generate some to produce some products, and let's assume that like the consumers are not changing their demand, then I need like less people, right?
Exactly. That's why that statistic is so important, right? So that statistic is the number one statistic in my view that's going to give you predictions on what's going to happen to the labor market. So I wrote a post that you need 3 statistics. You need the tasks in a job and how they relate to one another. You need the number of these tasks, what tasks and the number of them. And then the main statistic is the elasticity of consumer demand to start actually making predictions. Because as you said, it could go the opposite direction if consumers aren't responding.
So, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this level of analysis that I'm about to bring up. I watched as a bit of quite a bit younger, and I was a very nerdy kid. I watched the development of chess engines in a way that very much paralleled the development of LLMs, but with including with drama. For example, there was a chess engine in 2009 called Rybka that famously stole a bunch of code from an open source one called Crafty, and that got them banned from chess engine tournaments. But I recall that it was in 2001 where Garry Kasparov was famously beaten by Deep Blue. But then there's this question of how many years did it take for the best chess engine to be better than the best chess engine plus Grandmaster, which is where Grandmasters actively become harmful for the productivity of this very, a direct task. My understanding, and I have to check, is that took about 10 to 15 years later, and that by about 2015 or so that, the Grandmasters were no longer good for this. And indeed, today, Stockfish on my phone could destroy Magnus Carlsen, right? So what I'm wondering is, do we have a similar dynamic where maybe humans are retain value in the sense of, we are value adds for 5 or 10 more years, but then we straight up just harm the models by ever intervening? I really believe this, and I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I think chess is a task, right? It is a single dimensional task with many different components in it. I'm not saying it's a simple game, but chess is a task. It's one task, right? It took 15 years for what you're referring to as the centaur phase or the cyborg phase, whatever you want to call it, where the human plus machine was beaten by the machine alone. Now try to apply that to jobs, which are many tasks with many bottlenecks. Chess doesn't have any regulation. Chess doesn't have any political economy implications.
Wait, what? Wait, hold on. I seem to recall it being a big deal when Bobby Fischer was going up against.
Okay. But look, if the chess master becomes unemployed, the people do not rise up and vote out the president, right?
Kasparov tried, though. He did famously try to run for politics in Russia.
And that is very true. I think individual people have political power. I agree with you. Although in the standard economic framework, they actually don't. That's the median voter theorem. But anyway, we're not going to get into the median voter theorem on this channel. I think there's so chess is like literally the simplest case of this, and it took 10 or 15 years.
I point out though that there's way more money though involved, and I think
scale that up and imagine what that implies for the entire economy. So scaling that up, does that make you feel like all of white collar work will be displaced in 12 months?
Well, if you believe in recursive self-improvement and you look at the amount of capex being put into it, I do find it maybe not quite such a short time frame, but I still am really concerned about humans losing value. And indeed, this is where I hear about like Anthropic trying really hard to focus on making friendly AI, and this idea that we have one shot to make a friendly super intelligence because we'll lose control because all you have is like scalable oversight as your only kind of strategy. I'm just curious what your thoughts on this kind of analysis.
Yeah, I think so. You're saying like, look, AI is different. We should not think about it like chess. That's actually a very fair point. And the recursive self-improvement part is a big part of this. So then the question is the recursive self-improvement on the dimension of all of the tasks in a job, or on specific tasks where people get really, really, really good, in the sense that like the automation on the specific task gets so good. But again, if you have a correct model of the job, you have diminishing returns to being good at something. So like, how good is a hamburger going to be? Like let's say you have a recursive self-improvement on the taste of a hamburger. Stupid example, but let's go with it because we know what the physiology of taste looks like. You're going to be like, wow, this hamburger's really good. But at some point, like you can have like a Dyson sphere over the moon trying to improve the taste of the hamburger, and a person will go, oh yeah, I can kind of detect that. That was a little bit better, right? That's because of something called concave returns to improvement. So if you had no money or starving on the street and I gave you $1,000, you'd be like, yes. I gave you another $1,000. Awesome. I gave you another $1,000. Good. Now you have $1 million and I gave you $1,000. Or I gave you $10,000. I gave you $50,000. I gave you $100,000. You'd be like, okay, cool. More money is better than less money. We're economists. We believe this. But the amount of that improvement is actually going to change the outcome in a meaningful way decreases for humans. So I think you have to take that into account when you're thinking about recursive self-improvement too. Now maybe you're going to push back on me saying like, look, what recursive self-improvement is going to do is going to basically completely automate everything. Like on taste, on judgment, on every single thing. It's just going to be better. Then so then you're going to have two questions left. One, is there going to be room for things that people value because of the fact that they were done by a human? My view is the answer is yes. For a long time, longer than people expect. Two, let's talk about kind of like real sci-fi stuff. Let's talk about ASI. Is the ASI heteronomous or autonomous? If it is autonomous, in the sense that it's got full agency, it's got complete kind of governing and ownership rights over itself. And we don't need to talk about consciousness. We could just talk about systems that have their own ownership structure. The government gives them agency, the government, as far as like private property rights and everything like that. There is nobody who owns these systems. These systems are pursuing goals that are outside of any single human. Then the world gets really weird, much weirder than what I'm describing, or anything that I'm kind of thinking about, because then you get into a world where like, look, the goals of the ASI is to consume the most resources possible. Humans are consuming our resources. Let's get rid of them. You easily get into those sorts of things. Now you're talking about friendly AI, you're talking about alignment, you're talking about all of these sorts of questions, whether our ASI overlords are going to be nice to us. That's a world that I think is interesting and I think should be researched by people other than me. As an economist, I have nothing useful to say. And I want to stress this. I don't think I have anything useful to say about that world, at all. If that world happens,
I just want to say that I don't think that also Anthropic or OpenAI actually needs to be to look on these directions, in the sense that they are companies, and they are very they have one purpose, to earn money. And I think this we see it many times, right? That when Dario says that AI will take all white collar jobs in 6 months, we don't know if he's actually say it because he want to sell more license for he really believe in it, and it can be both, right?
yeah.
It's the same it's the same as the they are trying to answer questions in research. They are trying to answer questions about alignment, or about what are can we break to some I don't know, some very complicated systems, and can we guard? Do we need to guard our models? I think these questions are not supposed to answered by the AI companies.
And I think broadly, there's this, when you're talking about ASI, I often get into a feeling, my co-author and friend, Richard Thaler, he's got this quote that I love about how economists like to jump steps. He calls it the invisible hand wave. Oh, AI systems are getting really good. Invisible hand wave. There's an overarching ASI system that controls all of humanity. How do you get there? Oh, we just solved an Erdos problem. That's how. That's not straightforward. There's so many steps where with these sorts of sci-fi, or I don't want to say that these things are not worth thinking about. They're absolutely worth thinking about. They're absolutely worth doing research on by smart people. Safety is super important. All of these things are super important to be doing research on. I at all do not want to say that these are not worthwhile, but I think it's worth keeping into account that systems, infrastructures, and people respond to changing context. If a system looks like it's about to do something within a company, within the government, within people, they will respond to that thing to change that system's outcome. So it's not I don't know how, and maybe somebody knows how this is going to happen, how you go from the types of systems you have now to the sort of autonomous ASI that we were talking about earlier. And even if you keep you think the technology is there and all of this sort of thing, the infrastructure that allows that system to progress will potentially change the system's course. The companies don't want fully autonomous systems. People don't want fully autonomous systems. Nobody wants fully autonomous systems. And so that's important to take into account. Like Dario, whoever you want to call, whoever's building these things, I don't think they want ASI that is completely doesn't answer to humans. And that's worth keeping in mind, because we do have the power to steer these things.
And I want to, first of all, just give you a lot of credit for using the term ASI instead of AGI, because I personally am part of the Peter Norvig camp of AGI was here the day ChatGPT came out, which is to say that it's a low bar. But I've always felt that ASI was the real guiding star, and that most people who use AGI really mean ASI. And then I like RSI because it's much more measurable, and we appear to have hit a very limited human bootstrapped form of it. But I guess what I want to go to for the next question is I'm fascinated by the dynamics of how humans are interacting with these systems. So for example, I notice that there's a lot of literature that shows that humans really love the output from AI systems, LLMs, and image and video generators until they know it was AI created. I would even go as far as to say that many, if not most, workers in white-collar work today are engaging in what I would call AI laundering, right? Where they go and, find that the LLM output is full of slop, referring to repetitive phraseology that makes it obvious that you generated it with AI, such as the EM dash, semicolons, usage of phrases of the form "it's not X, it's Y." Ethan actually just posted a thing about how people who use AI all the time are robust and high quality detectors of those exact repetitive phraseology. So what I'm wondering, and I'll give one final bit here to use a chess analogy, which is now that chess engines are so much better than humans, we have reliable judges finally. Because historically, during that Bobby Fischer game with I guess in the 70s, the grandmasters, telling people on TV what's going on, there were parts of the game where they had no idea because they were so much below the two grandmasters playing. But so I'm influenced by the fact that now we have really good judges, and that chess in particular is a really more popular, I think, than ever. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, like, how do you think that humans will continue to relate to these? Like, do you see everybody just laundering AI outputs and pretending like we're all not actually just using Claude to do everything? Yeah. What's your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I think so I wanted to start with your first comment before you got into the question. I think it's really important to distinguish between AGI and ASI because those things have super different economic implications. Like AGI, and I'm using kind of Shane Legg's sort of idea about it. AGI is a system that can do complete most goals that a human can do, an average human can do, up to that limit. Now, AGI will have very important consequences, but that does not mean that the AGI will exceed the best human, right? AGI actually won't, because that once it does, that's called ASI. ASI is the system that can exceed the best human at everything. And the economics of those two things are actually fundamentally different, because you can still get AGI, and depending on the cost structure and all of these sorts of things, you would still want human organizations where, like, basically you select groups of people who are the best at what they're doing, where the envelope of skill is actually higher than AGI. And therefore, you're still employing a lot of humans in organizations. ASI flips that. Then if it can succeed at everything that a human does, the best human, then it beats an organization. And that's economically, that's critical. So I always like to distinguish between the two because that's actually a super meaningful distinction. Okay, so next step is about the fact that people often prefer stuff that or don't, at least don't recognize AI generated products, but then but they have a reaction when they find out. I think this is basic human psychology working, like millions of years of evolution, and in the sense that a lot of humans are unique as social beings. Unique as social beings, there's obviously other social beings like the primates and stuff like that, but unique in like what sociality means, like social learning is a lot higher for humans. Like things like trust networks and all of this sorts of things. Like our social brain is more advanced than any other closest animal to us, and that is in some ways what gave us the advantage. But that's also very much baked in. And so this response to something that you expect a human being to do, and then that response that is violated when you find out that a machine does it, in many cases where it really doesn't matter in many ways, like this was not a social activity or not a social interaction. So like, I think let's take code. If somebody told you this was human written code versus a AI written code, I think if there is any value difference in that, that's gonna go away, because human AI code, or like a hammer, this was made by a human being, and you're treating it as a commodity. It doesn't matter whether it's human or machine made. And this is a distinction between a commodity, and versus something that might not be a commodity, right? A commodity is, my understanding, and I think I'm using that definition, is something where you don't care if it's machine made or not. And so a lot of the products we use, like this monitor that I'm looking at right now, if you told me this was handmade by humans, I would actually start getting worried about the quality of the monitor, right? I don't want it to be made by a human. But other sorts of things, other products and other services, the value in that is the fact that it was made by a human or given by a human. And that could change. I'm not saying that is a static thing, but given the many millennia and years of evolution that have generated these preferences for socialization and for interpreting social information, I don't think it's going to go, I don't think it might never go away. The fact that, look, this is a piece of art, that art is the easiest example, which is why I'm using it, but it's actually not a very economically relevant example. I can give you more economically relevant examples. But like, if I told you that, the painting behind me was painted by a machine, we know from data that people, and you say this is one single thing that machine will ever do. It will never do this painting again. The value of that painting, just because a machine made it, is like 10, 15% versus a human made it for the same exact thing. Because the process of consuming art and consuming creative output, it's a social process. You are buying something, you're buying a relationship with the thing that made it. You are interested in the painter. So, if you look at the signature, for example, you'll be like, wow, I want to learn more about this person. If you want to learn more about this person who made this painting, you're listening to the podcast because I painted that. So, FYI. But in general, that's kind of like there's many goods where like the relational component is key, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. Now on dimensions, it will. Like if somebody's like, oh, they made kiosks at McDonald's, so now you're not interacting with a human. Well, yeah, I mean the interaction was a commodity to begin with, right? And fast food is a commodity to begin with. So I think you need to measure these things. You need to actually do the measurement, which is part of the research that I'm doing now, is like to actually measure what is a commodity and what is not a commodity. And the things that are not a commodity, where the relational component is key to the value, those are things that are going to be harder to.
And I'm very influenced also by Star Trek, and I want to point out just a few things Star Trek makes about predictions for AI. I guess the first one being the idea that physical robotics would be way more advanced, and mental, simulating like thought would be way less advanced with like data and the computer on the ships. But I'm more intrigued by replicators, and indeed in their universe, pretty much everything except latinum and maybe antimatter is now a commodity because you can replicate anything. But I also recall that it's a major plot point in both Next Generation and Deep Space Nine about like people making food by hand anyway and claiming that, oh, the food tastes better because it wasn't replicated, right? And the whole restaurant, I think Picard's dad, owns a French restaurant or something on Earth, and this is a big part of like multiple episode plot points. So do you think that like trying to think about intelligence as do you think this notion of like a replicator for the mind or replicator for thought is makes any sense? And do you even think that any of the predictions made in something like Star Trek are valuable here?
Sci-fi is extremely valuable for prediction. So I think it's really valuable for prediction, and some of those predictions turn out right, some of them turn out wrong. If you ask Demis about consciousness, he views it as inherently a computational process, and if it's inherently a computational process, it could potentially be replicated. I'm an economist. I'm just a lowly economist. I just have very little to say about that. So I have wonderful colleagues who study these questions who have very smart things to say about this. I don't have smart things to say about this. So I could say things about them, but I won't. And I don't necessarily even disagree, but I think this is like the real question about what advanced AI systems will be, whether they're autonomous or not. And if they're autonomous, like again, like I don't know how to think about it. But notice that in a lot of there's two types of science fiction. There's science fiction where we are humans battling autonomous machines. Terminator, many such examples. But there's Star Trek, right? There's Star Wars. There's a lot of other sorts of science fiction where you have cyborgs, you have machines that are inherently at the service of people, despite the fact that they're incredibly advanced. And those two economies look really different. If you are in the Star Trek economy, my prediction is that even if you have replicators, even with this, you will get the Star Trek prediction that there's provenance and value in human input into specific goods and services. Now, can that sustain the economy? My conjecture is based on the historical reading. As incomes go up, because commodities are becoming cheaper, people will have more money to spend, and that money will go into a larger relational non-commodity sector. So the sector will expand and therefore employ many more people than what we see now. And it will include things that we don't think about as relational jobs, such as nurses, doctors, teachers, things like that, where these jobs will have very highly automated components, but then there will be a relational component to that job that people will value and will pay money for it to be done by a human. And again, they have that money because their incomes have increased. So the question is like, do you want a fully automated tutor? Or do you want a AI system with a human tutor who could predict, who could like provide support, empathy, and all of these sorts of things? And my conjecture will be that as people are richer, they will demand the second thing over the first thing, and therefore you will get high employment in that sector. Because now people will be able to essentially afford a one-on-one tutor with a very capable AI system. And now your comment is, let's look at chess. The centaur phase of chess was disappeared. This is not the centaur phase, right? Because the centaur phase is on a task level. It's not on a job level. And I'm describing something on a job level.
Question about inequality. You talked about inequality before, right? And you said it like one of your concerns is that like that people like the less educated people will adopt AI like less, and that the gaps will increase, right? But I live in the Upper West Side, and everyone are here like on finance or like VCs and these types of jobs, and like and they talk about it like that probably like AI can do much better work than they are doing, and they really afraid that like it will take their job. That like now like you don't need these types of jobs. So what do you think? Do you think like we'll still see these like fractions that you talked about them before in like the upper level jobs or not?
When do you think the performance of actively managed funds was replicated and exceeded by automated systems?
In the 90s, Renatech, maybe? That's a
Maybe
guess.
I would say probably the 60s. It's called an index fund. An index fund beats any active, or not any, but if you got an actively managed fund by some of your very nice friends on the Upper West Side, you will be losing money compared to an index fund, which is like, the algorithm there is like, a linear regression on how much weight you should put on stuff. So the jobs of these people have been automated and have been for a very long time and have been getting superior performance for a very long time. And this is well known. I'm not giving you, this is so well known. This is like if you talk to an academic finance person or almost any finance person who has ever read anything about finance, you will know the fact that I told you. This is not a trade secret. The fact that actively managed funds are outperformed by passive index funds. And yet, what do you see? For 50, 60 years, you see people engaged in the industry and very highly employed and making a lot of money. I think it's worth asking the question of why this persists, why there's so much wealth in jobs that have been automated for a long time with superior performance. And I really do think that jobs are more complicated and more the value of jobs is wrapped up in much more than like a single statistic, like the return on investment, for example, which everybody should tell you that's the biggest thing that you should worry about is return on investment. But your neighborhood
So
tells you
what are the other factors that you think of?
people want, with finance, I think people just want to interact with somebody who can explain to them and meet them at their level, who takes them out to dinner if they're a high worth client. High finance is essentially going to dinner and getting drinks.
Isn't the term
But
three
do you
martinis?
think
Yeah, exactly. That is the job.
But so do you think like but do you think like this is because like in some sense like the rich people just keep like their own like environment, or like just like control the economy in some sense, and like they don't want to share with other people?
No, I don't think so. I think like, people there's not like there's certainly elements of that. Like, you certainly have like a lot of exclusion with income. Like you have spaces that private private markets is a good example of it. Like, you need a certain amount of money to participate in private markets. And so, like, the democratization of finance, like that Robinhood is trying to do, for example, like, which is actually super problematic if you think about it, what that means. Again, just like buy an index fund. And, high finance is more than going to dinner. I have friends in finance. I'm sorry I said that, etc. But, but I think there is an element of exclusivity with income. I don't think it's like a wall, like in the sense of like a legal wall that's keeping people out, but I think you will be surprised at the extent to which automation will not impact certain sectors of the economy that seem extremely automatable. Because of all sorts of things, like the types of thing that you're talking about. Like, I get my money managed by this guy. Why? Are you making more money? Probably less money, in fact. But it's still something I could tell people. I could still have a dinner party. All of these sorts of things. And these things matter for people. Again, supply is shaped by demand. This is like Keynes's great insight is demand makes its own supply. And that is a really important. You have to think about what people want. And the technologists will say people's preferences will change with AI. And I'm sure they are right, but it's hard to overwrite a million years of evolution.
What do you think? So let's say you talked about private markets. I just what do you think about like the current evaluation of and OpenAI, Anthropic, like these companies that maybe they will go to IPO soon or not, but do you think this is something that I don't know is sustainable? Because it looks that like there is a lot of money that people wants to put in AI in different startups, and then the like let's say the regular the classical tools that people evaluate companies are irrelevant these days.
It's a really complicated question. Like, let's say you ask the person like in the November, like, should companies be spending so much on compute and capex on data centers and stuff like that? Many people will say this is a financial bubble. They were wrong. Turns out you need it. Like, as you see some of the companies, I'm not going to name them, but they're having really big problems with compute because they didn't do the build out. And other companies that were like, we're going to go nuts on compute, they're the ones who are doing better. And so it's really hard to call a financial bubble. It's really hard to say like this is mispriced. Even ex post, it's really hard because you need to think about like what are the ex ante beliefs about stuff like that. So like that's why economics, when we're trying to think about like, what is mispriced, you almost have to do like case studies. Like Palm was mispriced because it was a subset of 3M, and 3M gave you Palm shares, and Palm was worth more than 3M. So you literally can do the arithmetic to say Palm was mispriced. This is the sort of exercise you need to do to say something is mispriced. So that's all to say that I don't have any confident view on like are they overvalued. The thing that gives me pause is the idea of the moat, right? Right now, there is no moat. Like, you have open models, like basically consistently 6 to 8 months behind. So like you have Mythos now, right? And there's a lot of conversations about Mythos. If things keep going the way that they're going, we're going to have an open Mythos in 6 to 8 months. And so when you have a process like that, like it's hard to think about like valuing these companies. They need to either like the way that you get a moat is like through something like a network effect. So like, Microsoft had a network effect. Right. So they got adopted within all of enterprise. And so it's really hard to break a network effect because there's all of these compatibility issues, all of these complicated things that when you have a provider across a giant spectrum, you have a moat simply from the scale. And that's kind of, I think, what Anthropic is trying to do with the enterprise, where everybody's adopting Claude and then they'll stay with Claude. It's really hard because, it's actually really easy to switch to another model. Right. So I don't know how much of a moat that is.
But what kind of assumptions? So like right now, like Anthropic and OpenAI like losing like billions of dollars every year, right? And like even with their own predictions, like probably in the next like 4 or 5 years, they will still lose a lot of money, right? So what are the assumptions that you actually need to make in order to say, okay, like this is like it actually makes sense, even though they spend so much money now, they will earn something in the
Well,
future.
look at the revenue numbers. The revenue numbers are super high. They're also making a lot of money. So which is really worth paying attention to. And they're making a lot of money. And so when you think about like why are they losing money? It's because they're investing so much money in training and all of this sort of thing. So if you here's an assumption, like, and this is an assumption, could be wrong. Like, let's say one of these companies comes up with a moat. And because of that moat, like maybe a new architecture, something that nobody else knows about. And all of a sudden that company has a proprietary product that everybody wants to buy and does not require further training. Well, their costs just drop precipitously and they're making way more revenue. So that's a set of assumptions, right? And I think like people are betting on some version of that like a company gets a moat and the costs go down.
But here you have like even a bigger problem because the inference costs so much money, and like basically they lose money as they have more users, right?
Yeah.
And
No, you know
so
what the solution is going to be? They're going to
what?
increase prices.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So two further questions on that, Alex. One, I'm also seeing kind of a consensus that, putting all of your thinking into AI models causes extreme cognitive atrophy. I can tell you, I feel way dumber now than I did 2 years ago. And I'm actually terrified of ever having to interview again because like I already was mid at best at leak code style problems. And now I'm very, very concerned about this. So what I'm wondering then is, do you think that that kind of cognitive atrophy will continue to be a big problem and even make some of these, elites that you talk about that use AI systems so much, 10 years from now in a lot more danger? And then I'm also curious about idea of pricing. I've been hearing people be like, I would pay, 2,000 a month or putting 10x multipliers on whatever they're currently paying from Anthropic. And so I'm actually really worried about like trusts and monopolistic things, especially given the current administration's complete unwillingness to enforce any of those laws. And so do you think that we could really be in a world where like even a few of these AI companies just radically raise their prices and force us into a very bad position in general?
Again, a lot of layers to that question. I am going to answer the second one first, and I'll go back to the first one. And if I don't go back to it, come back to it. So the pricing question is super important because many people believe that we are going to hit like a critical time in 2026 about compute scarcity. Because again, right now we are in a world where adoption of the inference models is very low. And that's going to increase. And if that increases, compute demand is going to increase so much. So that's why there's this like huge attempt to build out and, Elon wanting to put data centers in space and all of these sorts of things, which actually like honestly kind of makes sense. From like just, there's no town halls in space to keep you from building your data center.
Yeah, to avoid NIMBYs. That's true.
Yeah, like the moon is not a constituent, which is good for now. But so I think there's going to be a compute crunch. Now, what's going to happen if you? So this is something that I'm like actively working at with Steve Howe and Eric Budish, my colleague at Booth. Thinking through what does market design tell us about what the market will look like. First of all, prices are going to go up. Like, of course, they're going to go up. Now, but there's two parts to that. One is, are these monopolies in the sense that can they charge value rather than cost? Like, can they charge? A monopolist can charge willingness to pay, right? A competitive company can charge cost. So depending on the competition in the market, you're going to get somewhere in between those. And so we're clearly not in a monopoly for several reasons. First, on the frontier side, there's high substitution between kind of like the big three, I would call them the medium two, whatever you want to call these things. And then you have all of the pressure coming from open models. And all of that creates a really, we should be so grateful that private companies published research in the 2010s. Because what that means is that the basic architecture of these models is well known and public knowledge. Imagine a world where these companies were not publishing the research in the 2010s and one company had proprietary information on how to build LLMs. We would be in a much worse position right now. Right now, we have a market with competitive pressure that will prevent just like one company from charging willingness to pay. If that was the case, you could easily see yourself in a world where, prices are super, super high. Most people have no access to any of this technology. Instead, we live in a world where, now you need basically differentiation in order to charge above cost. And what's going to happen, what above cost is probably going to look like is that Anthropic or OpenAI or somebody else creates a tier for high value clients who put a premium on guaranteed access to frontier models whenever they want. So this is the reserve tier. Basically, Jane Street or something like that says, I always need access to Mythos, and I need access to Mythos for this much compute. And it doesn't matter what you're seeing in the rest of the market. It doesn't matter if everybody on Earth is using is wanting to use the AI model. You need to reserve this for me. This will be a tier where where Anthropic or OpenAI will be able to charge substantially above cost because of that insurance premium. Then you're going to have a tier of like just basically pay as you go, like API calls, which depending on the differentiation between the models, you could potentially charge a bit above marginal above cost. And there you will again see higher prices because right now we are not pricing at cost. And then you're going to see for the plebs, you're going to have, the free pro plans with very degraded models that are subsidized by the other tiers. And those prices will look reasonable. Prices will likely look below cost sometimes, but we will be extremely constrained in what we can do in that tier. As far as both like how much we can use these models, what type of models we can use, and what kind of performance we're getting from those models. So those are just kind of like three basic tiers that will likely develop in these markets. Two of those tiers are going to be way more expensive than what we're seeing now. The last tier will be reasonable, but at the same time, you're going to get lower quality.
And do you think like we will see, for example, I don't know, like my example is like phones, right? That like probably like we don't see, a big difference like from a technological perspective in like phones, right? Just like most of the time you will pay on Apple like more because it's Apple, right? Or like Samsung. Do you think we will see something like that also with AI, or like everything will be just the capabilities and just
Yeah, so the phone
what is
market
better
is
model?
the phone market is super interesting because it's really the difference between these closed and open models. And the reason Apple is able to charge such a high premium is because they created a moat, which is they created all of these network effects where like you have an app store where everything in the Apple ecosystem only works with Apple things. And because of that creates a very differentiated product from Android. And the Android market is the exact opposite. It's like anybody can do whatever you want. There's like lots of different types of manufacturers, lots of different types of developers. But people don't really want that because people want no, people do want that. There's obviously there's a lot of more demand for it, but people value the simplicity and like the elegance and like the ease of use of an Apple product. Like, so I have, for one of my one thing that I do that I use a PC for, and the PC is similar to Android, right? Just because there's all these windows constantly popping up.
I just want to say that like this is very American perspective, right? That like yeah, I need it like everything will talk with each other, and like I don't care to pay like I don't know 5 times more on like this, that all the products will work smoothly with each other.
I don't think it's an American perspective. I think it's a rich country perspective. I think like in Norway, you get a very similar perspective. I think you
So
don't get that perspective in where I'm from, which is Moldova. You don't get that perspective, right? Because it's a poor country. So I think preferences shift with income.
So I still think you didn't answer, and that's okay. I keep asking you like 3 questions at once, but I still want to
Cognitive
hear
atrophy.
cognitive atrophy. I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Um, Cognitive atrophy is important. I think, I mean, I worry about this a lot for myself. So what I did was I differentiated what things I think I have alpha in and what things I don't have alpha in, because it's really important to think about like, I might be losing some skills, right? But those skills are not important to me as a value product for society. And in the sense that like I'm a researcher, my value to society, not a company, but just the society, in the sense that I'm producing research, is made up of certain things. And my ability to run and write code in Stata is not one of those values. My ability to curate and ask questions and think deeply about things is a value. And heavy AI use can atrophy both. And thinking deeply, like offloading questions and things like that. And that's something that I'm worried about. And I've developed protocols. And for writing, I think I'm like a fairly good communicator, for example. I don't want to toot my own horn, but that is my view of myself. So what do I do for that? I decided to read old books more. So I'm like reading like books from the 1800s and complicated, dense text that isn't absolutely not AI written. So I make time in my day to do that in order for that skill that I think is important not to atrophy. Now, other stuff that I care a lot less about atrophying, like I find atrophying those skills. So I think AI has the potential to atrophy many, many things. It's important for every individual to identify the things that they don't want to atrophy and to take steps that they don't. So like, I think for some of us, linked code problems are not going to be, Alan, maybe you really value your lead code skills. If you do, keep going. If you don't, forget about them. It doesn't matter,
I'm
right?
so excited to never do it again. Please
Exactly. Like,
do it.
thinking like writing out like a code for a real business cycle model in MATLAB. Like I used to be able to do that in grad school. I had to do it. The fact that I don't know how to do it anymore, I could fine. That's fine to atrophy. My ability to sit down and process and come up with ideas from dense text and from many, many ideas. I want that skill to improve, not atrophy. And therefore, I'm going to work on keeping that.
But do you think it will become like a kind of like a status, like a society that like I know Latins or something like that, that like you just say that I have enough time and money to do these things, and I don't have to use AI?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, gets us back into the earlier question, like the not using AI part of human value. I think that is going to be part of it. Like, I think a lot of that is going to be, status and income are going to be driven by like not using the technology. But you see that here now. Like you go to like right now I'm in the city of Philadelphia, and I have a grocery store called Suprema, which is like not a very nice grocery store. You can look through the shelves, and I shop there all the time because it's next door. But you look through the shelves and you look at the labels of the food. It says like, here's flour or here's coffee, whatever, you buy it. You go to Whole Foods, handmade flour, human curated this artisanal thing. So it's like it becomes like and like are they better? Like, you make a loaf of bread from like a human flour versus non-human flour. Bread probably tastes the same. So it's really like it's like it is like becomes like something that you put value in, and has a value. The fact that there's a kind of like a human in the loop as incomes increase. And that's kind of the thesis that I was telling you before, is that as incomes increase, there is a possible path towards this sort of world. Now, there's other paths too. And I think like if you want to have, Phil Trammell talk about the other path where like, labor share goes to zero, I think it's worth having those conversations.
And I guess related to this, you know, I did competitive debate, and in debate you have to be basically to the left of Lenin to win, at least at the college level. So I've read a lot of, I'd call it the left wing canon, you know, French postmodernists, Baudrillard, Derrida, Deleuze, Foucault, Camus, etc. I'm curious, right? Because many of them have written theory talking about how like capitalism is this many-headed hydra. You cut off one, you know, head, two more form. Do you think capitalism, even capitalism as we know it, kind of survives in most of these worlds that seem plausible that we're kind of entering into? Or do you think that a real displacement of how we think of like economics is possible as a result of AI?
Yeah, so I think capitalism is a broad enough definition or concept to be almost useless in a debate, because you have capitalism being one company selling everything and having political power, economic power, and that's capitalism. You could also get like 1960s capitalism, where there's like high competition, there's a welfare state, everything like that. Those are two that those are capitalism, right? So I think it's like it's hard to say like what is going to be capitalism or not. What you could say is like what are going to be the specific changes to the economy. You know, I have also read a lot of hyper left economic thinking, and I think there's a lot of things that a lot of elements that I think could potentially be something that is incorporated in the economy. So like my hypothesis is that something that's going to become politically popular and potentially even be something that gets enacted is the idea of broader ownership, where like workers own firms and things like that. And what that means is that as that firm adopts more capital, less labor, the workers still are making money and everything's kind of fine. This is kind of like a version of universal basic capital. I actually think that those are extremely attractive policy tools. But here's the thing, that's not getting rid of capitalism. Workers are earning money from returns to capital and they're spending it in the economy in consumer markets. So on the surface, you could have elements of like leftist thinking of like broad ownership, but you still have a market economy on a different layer. And so capitalism is like, you know, somebody would look at the Soviet Union and they would say that's a capitalist system because they had money, right? So, and another
There's an old joke about that, about it's still, sorry, I have to say it. It's Stalin goes in, here's a debate between the right wing communists and the left wing communists. The left wing communist says, oh, we should have no money. The right wing communist says, oh, we should have money. And then Stalin says, no, you have to use dialectics and merge the synthesis. Some people will have money and some people won't.
That's good. That's really good. But the Soviet Union was actually, it's like interesting to think about, because on the one hand, they were like looking at China, like, is that a capitalist system? Like, on the one hand, like, it's more capitalist, depending on the dimension that you look at, like hyper regional competition, money in the economy, all of this sort of thing. But on the other hand, you have like a lot of state control over certain things. So it's capitalism is like one of those things that like is, it's a term broad enough to be useless in my view, because any sort of hyper left economic system you could come up with will be, somebody will say, oh, that's actually capitalism because X, Y, and B, C. And other things that are like super, super concentrated fascist states are fully capitalist because, you know, you have a market economy, consumer goods, and everything like that. So it's too broad of a definition.
Then let me just follow up and ask then, you know, I'm familiar with, I'm a big fan of the concept of Georgism, right, which historically was like the land value tax and Henry George, what he proposes in Progress and Poverty. I think that modern versions of it talk very heavily about like ownership of the commons, as you mentioned, right? Like, and indeed, you know, I interpret movements like Wikipedia and even Aaron Swartz, I don't know if you know who Aaron Swartz was. Yeah, big deal for us thought workers, you know, about the whole information wants to be free. So like, do you see these kinds of movements that try to, I would say Georgism is, you know, unapologetically capitalist, right? But tries really hard to redistribute the value back to individuals through also things like UBI. And thus, Andrew Yang is probably the only Georgist candidate I've ever seen in American politics. But do you have opinions?
We're gonna see way more. We're gonna see way more. Like, we're gonna see political parties, if AI goes the way that a lot of us think that it will, I think we're going to see a lot more political parties, political candidates talk about running on platforms that have redistribution, massive redistribution as the platform. But what that redistribution looks like will now be like a super important part of debate, like whether redistribution looks like, hey, the government is now going to cut you checks based on, you're going to be guaranteed, like Social Security almost for everybody, like Social Security for everyone, like Medicare for all, but SS for all, whatever. So you could have a system like that, or you could have a system where like you have a sovereign wealth fund of like AI exposed companies, and that fund, as it grows larger, as the share of those companies become a larger part of the economy, that fund starts paying a lot of dividends to people in the economy. Those are two kind of versions. You could have models of like, if a company gets large enough, it needs to distribute ownership shares to their employees. This is like the ownership employee owned firm model. So you could have, all of these are like redistributive policies, but they actually have very big differences in terms of like the economics of these policies. So for example, like the plain vanilla case of UBI has like pretty bad like democratic aspects. Like you have basically the majority of the population completely powerless because they're completely dependent on like whoever's in power in the government and whoever is being taxed in order to cut them the check. Whereas if they own elements and there's property rights, then they're all very powered. Like it's a much bigger form of empowerment because they are owners of capital. And you basically need a war in order to get rid of to eliminate that ownership. So those are redistributions policies, but the political economy of these policies could not be more different.
And how do you think it will look like in like non-democratic countries, I think China? Do you think it will like they will like they will try to treat it like differently?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I think reading about like China's response to AI, you could see like in some ways, if depending on how worried you are about displacement, you might feel better about what's going to happen in China than you would about what's going to happen in America, in the sense that, right now they're like thinking about and putting potential policies into place where like firms need to firms cannot fire, for example, due to automation. That was one thing that I don't know the extent to which that's a bill or a law or anything like that. So I'm very ignorant about these things. So like take all of this with a grain of salt. I I I I like to be very upfront about the fact that the focus of my research is on kind of Europe and America, you could think, which is like very problematic. I actually wrote about the fact that like a lot of the things that I write about and the predictions that I'm making, they're very, very different for the developing. So for example, we were talking about like commodities versus not commodities. If you don't have a consumer market and your entire economy is depending on exporting commodities to rich countries, I don't know what's going to happen in those countries, and I honestly don't know, and I'd be very worried about that. But in terms of like a developed, relatively rich country like China, with a different mode of government, you could go either way. And it's hard to predict. It depends on like that's the problem with having non-democratic governance, is it really depends on who's in power, and that will completely determine the economic outcomes for the labor market. So like if whoever's in power says like I'm going to be extremely pro-labor, then you might have like less displacement in that country. Now, whether this is good or bad, I mean, you could spend 2 hours on that, because there's obviously downstream consequences of those sorts of decisions. But it's hard to say.
And then I guess two highly related questions. What do you think is the impact on blue collar, both skilled and unskilled? And what would you recommend to any like parents with children, about like how do you reason about like, do I even need to care about sending my kids to college? Like what do I do to try to give them some kind of decent livelihood?
I mean, I think Ben Sasse had this was giving an interview, and he said the era of going to college or being in high school and thinking that what I'm going to decide on doing is what I will be able to do for the rest of my life until I die is over, and we will never have that era again. The second part, I don't know, but the first part, I think that's true. So I think the only advice I can give, if you want advice, is to just like be adaptable and like to have the best sort of skill set that allows you to be adaptable. Like, right now there's all these like pressure on like, oh, blue collar is fine, or the white collar apocalypse. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, the amount of investment in automating blue collar work is so incredibly high. And when you look at the dimensionality of a lot of that work is so much lower, like the number of tasks. So thinking about like, obviously it's highly dimensional, but the tasks are often very separable too. So thinking about like a truck driver has many responsibilities other than just driving the truck. They need to unload the truck. They need to do security for the truck while it's on the highway. Lots of different tasks, but those tasks are all potentially separable. And all of them, you could easily get the jump to like, all right, we have Waymos. Why can't that thing drive a truck? The reason, largely regulation. If there's enough pressure for that regulation to fall, that job could potentially be gone. Or a plumber, like if the robotics, you see robots doing more and better things. You have a lot of money, you have a lot of pressure on doing these sorts of things. So I think like I worry way more about blue collar work than I do about white collar work. Just because the blue collar work is it's hard to go from plumbing to another job. Whereas a software engineer, their job usually kind of expands. They like something is automated, then their job becomes something else, like a manager of agents or something like that. It's evolving. You could see these things evolve. You could see them becoming different. You could see the tasks change and new tasks be created. Whereas like low dimensional jobs, again, I don't want to say like they're low dimensional as in like there's not a lot of skill. These are highly, highly, highly skilled jobs. But the jump to new tasks within that job is the capacity is lower in blue collar work. And
So you say we need to be like well educated, rich, and healthy, right?
my dad always says it's better to be rich and healthy than poor and sick.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
that's right.
Even in the
You
future, in the AI future.
100% confident comment.
And
That's
I point out also that a lot of blue collar work is very taxing on the body.
yes.
Right. So that's an important bit of healthiness.
It's extremely, my dad's a construction worker. He did construction most of his life. My entire family is basically blue collar work and so extended family and so on. People like people in the U.S. are like union people doing tiles and all that stuff. Like you see that on the body. Like it takes its toll. So I have like one relative who's like 80 and refuses to retire. He's still like painting houses somehow. This is like a mutant, right? But it's most people retire early because it takes such a heavy toll on the body, and like the retirement is not pleasant. Like there's so many aches and pains, like everybody's back hurts, knees are shot. Physical work is hard, even in a developed country like the US. So it's yeah. So I know that this is just to say, like, I'm not like an economist who like doesn't know what blue collar work looks like. Like I'm very familiar with blue collar work, like my entire family.
But how do you see like the retirement, like from I don't 40 years from now, 50 years from now? Do you think like so? I think like the most of the Silicon Valley or like the bonton in the Silicon Valley is that like no, we don't need even to save for retirement because like AGI and like AI will replace all of us. So like who knows what's going to be? What do you think will be like in 40,
I like
50
to
years?
pay attention to what people do instead of what they say. You should look at their 401ks. I bet they're maxing them out. I would be shocked if they're not maxing them out. I would bet that the person who is most like, oh, stop saving for retirement, consume, we will be, in a world of abundance. They are maxing out their 401k. And so the thing that you learn as a behavioral economist, which is something that I've done for a long time, is that beliefs are very interesting concepts. There's one type of belief, which is the type of belief that an economist's view is these are decision relevant objects. This means that if I think the probability of state A is increasing versus state B, I change my actions accordingly, right? If I think that something's going to fall on my head with a 10% probability, if I sit right here, I will move, right? Because that changes my probability about my welfare of sitting in this spot. But there's another form of what we call colloquially as beliefs, which are closer to values, which is closer to like me signaling or me wanting to feel a certain way. And so I think a lot of the conversation about people saying X or Y, I think, those are just values. Because when you look at people's behavior, it doesn't accord with those values and with what they're saying. So I think we should spend more and I'm not saying like it's completely irrelevant. We should listen to this and we should take it into account. But I think we need to spend a bit more time thinking about what people are doing. And if you look at people's portfolios and their choices, like are they having kids? Are they sending them to school? Are rich people's kids going to college? Are they?
Yeah.
They are. They
Well,
sure
well,
are.
but they're going to elite schools like Ivies, right? Like, do you think that non-Ivy and non-elite education survives?
So that's an important question. I'm an educator in the university system. I think that the higher ed is going to have a big change. So I think you hit the nail on the head. I think higher ed's going to shrink. And it's going to shrink in specific ways. I think many schools will close because if you look historically at how many schools we have now versus how many schools we had back in the day, it's much higher. There's been a huge expansion of higher ed. In my view, it's been because of subsidies to higher ed. What is going to be the return to some degrees is going to change, and that's going to change people's behavior. And the other thing that we haven't talked about a lot is changing demographics. We're getting older as a society. Every year, we're going to have fewer and fewer people go to college. So just like mechanically, forget about AI. Schools are going to close, right? So all that's really important to take into account. I think elite schools will be fine. You look back at Harvard 400 years ago, it was still Harvard. Princeton in the early 1900s, there was no element of like, we're training you to do a particular job. So even if you have huge changes to the economy, the elite schools are going to be fine. Maybe there's going to be changes, but they're going to be fine. The non-elite schools are more complicated. But that's a whole episode.
Okay, I think we are out of time. We didn't talk about agentic economic, but maybe next time.
Yeah, have me
Um,
back. Talk about agentic AI.
yeah,
Well, we did talk about Star Trek. We did talk about, uh, replicating food.
it was
Autonomous.
really interesting. Like it was really, really great. And I think like this is such an important topic. There is so much uncertainty, but still, like we can try to guess and like try to learn like how the future will be. So important. So oh wait, before like we will end, like do you have something that you want to add, that you want to sell, that you want to
Yeah,
tell
I
to the
have
people?
this product that I'd like for all of you to buy. I don't have anything to. If you want to read more about what I write, I have a Substack called Ghosts of Electricity. For the Dylan fans in the audience, you will know why I titled the Substack Ghosts of Electricity. For the non-Dylan fans, I think it's also got like an interesting. It's about AI and technological change, and if you think about LLMs as ghosts, it's got a nice.
I'm a big fan. Ghost in the Shell is one of my favorite animes ever, and
Yeah,
I'm actually very, very heavily influenced by the idea that like we might scientifically understand the soul and be able to remove it from the body, which is what that anime predicts. So yeah,
I love Ghost in the Shell too. That's a great anime. So, but I also love Bob Dylan. So all of that combines into the title of my Substack. So I hope you read it, but I don't have anything to sell.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming. It was great.
Thank you. This was a pleasure. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the audience. Bye bye.